How you doing there? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed, Daf 30 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, friends, what's that noise from outside? Sound like some machine. Anyways, on I'd say that the two main interesting things about Daf 30 are number one, Yayin Mevushal. Very interesting, right? Because we started talking about Yayin yesterday, and Stam Yenam, that if Oivdei Kechovim have wine, so then that becomes tricky for a Yid to be able to drink it. Yain Mevushal, though, that if the wine is cooked, well, then it's no longer going to be libated, and therefore that becomes different. That we'll learn about, and then, although interestingly, it doesn't answer for the question about chasnus, about intermarriage and avoiding social drinking in order to avoid intermarriage. So, Yain Mevushal fixes Yain Nesech, but not necessarily chasnus, intermarriage. But anyways, okay, we're going to start discussing Yain Mevushal. And what else can I tell you? Gilui, right? Uncovered liquids that were concerned that snakes will get into it and impart their venom into the liquids. That's also a thing on today's daf. And a third thing unrelated to today's daf is that after this recording, I will be on my way to the John F. Kennedy Airport, heading back to Eretz Yisrael to enjoy the fruits of Eretz Yisrael that will be awesome. Now, here we go. We begin on Daf Chavtes Omid Beis at the two dots, about 10 or so lines from the bottom of Daf Chavtes Omid Beis. V'achometz shel evdei kochavim shemitchilos oyoin. So the Mishnah had said that vinegar, right? So if an ovid kochavim has vinegar, an ovid kochavim has vinegar. Now that vinegar at one point was wine. It was wine that turned to vinegar. So that is also bano. That is also bahanos. Now frek the Gemara, pshita, obviously it's also bano. Mishum ta'achmitz pokle isuri, ho ho, ho ho. Of course it's going to be also. If the Ovid Kochavim has wine, and that wine, 1 second, I need to turn on the backup recording. Forgot about that. 1 second. Wait, why can't I see? Uh-oh. It's always there. There it is. Let's just turn it on, and it's on. Oops. Opa. So, where was I? So if the Ovid Kochavim has wine, and it's also pano, because it's, stam yenam, well then, when it vinegarizes, it doesn't become mutter. I mean, it was also already. It was stam yenim. It doesn't. Once it's usher, it remains usher. So what makes it? How does it become mutter? Right. So again, so the Gemara says, pshita. Obviously, it's also mishum de achmitz pakale isur. What? Just because it turned into vinegar, its isur went away, was uprooted. What uprooted it? Rav Ashi, so it says Rav Ashi, what it's coming to teach us is thus. Chometz shelanu biyad oived kochavim, that it's specifically also because initially it was wine. When the oived kochavim had, right, he initially had wine, and it was also when it was wine. And therefore, when it becomes vinegar, nothing uproots the Isser. However, what if a Yid gives vinegar to an Ovid Kochavim, which means that it was never actually wine when the Ovid Kochavim had it? He always just had vinegar. Well, if that's the case, then it's not stam yenam and ain't sarich chosam besoch chosam, and you would not need a double seal. We're going to learn about double seals, I believe, tomorrow. But you would not need a double seal if um, you give vinegar directly to an oved kochavim. Imishum insuche lo menasche, because what are you concerned about? If you're concerned that he's going to use it for his libations, for his avodah zarah, they wouldn't use vinegar. They would use wine. So that's not a concern. V'imishum ichlufe, and if we're concerned that, well, maybe he's going to swap your vinegar for his vinegar that was initially wine with him. So kevon deika choisam loitarach u mizayit. But for that, one lock would be enough, because Keilu, you have vinegar, and for him to, well, like, you, the motivation for him to switch your vinegar with his vinegar is not high enough that he would go through the trouble of, like, breaking your lock and then having to replace your lock, and just in order to switch for vinegar. So, so when we're dealing with vinegar, there isn't as much of a concern. A, because he's not going to use it for avodah zarah, and B, he's not going to swap it for his own, just because it's not worth the headache for vinegar at the end of the day. Fine. Says Reb Illa Shaninu, Yayin Mevushal shel Ovdei Kechavim, that we teach that the Yayin Mevushal, right, so we were talking about vinegar until now. Now we're talking about cooked wine. I'm sure many people have heard about cooked wine, right? Because, especially if you're going to be in a scenario where there are non-Jewish people around, and you want to be able to drink wine and not have to worry about yenesech, stam yenim. So the antidote, the solution generally is that, well, buy yain mevushal, right? If it's mevushal wine, so then there's nothing to worry about. You can go to whatever restaurant you want or whatever it is. So here we go. So yain mevushal. So where are we? I keep on losing the place. So Amr Illa, says Illa. Shaninu, we taught Yayin Mevushal, cooked wine, belonging to the idolaters. Shohari mitchilaso yain, that was initially wine. So if the Oved Kechavim initially had it as wine and then cooked it, osir. So that would be also pshita. That's obvious. I mean, if when the Oved Kechavim had it before it was cooked, so it's just regular wine, so of course it's osir because it's stam yenim. So then cooking it doesn't get rid of the isser. So pshita again, mishum the ivshil, just because he cooked it, pakale isur, the isser was uprooted. No, the isser is still there. Rashi says, Rashi also Lashmina, what it's going to teach us is Yayin Mevushal shelanu bi'araved ovdei kechavim, that if, however, we have Yayin Mevushal and we give that Yayin Mevushal to the Oved Kechavim, ein tzarich choisam b'tzarich choisam, you would not need a double seal. Imshum insuche lemenasche, in terms of, is he going to libate with the Yayin Mevushal? He won't. He's not going to libate with cooked wine. The imishum ichlufe, and if we're concerned that, well, maybe he'll switch the wine with, maybe he'll switch your cooked wine with his uncooked wine, and that would be osir wine, that's also not a concern. One lock would be enough to solve that issue, because kevin dika choisum echod leitarach umizayiv, because since there is, at the end of the day, a lock on it, he's not going to go through the headache of, like, breaking the lock, switching the wine. Like, it's just not worth it. So one lock would be enough. Sounds like really the main concern there, right, is not the yenesech, because he's not going to libate it. The main concern is that he's really going to swap it for his own, which would be problematic. But the single lock that you have on the Yayin Mevushal should be enough to discourage him, the Oved Kechavim, from swapping your wine for his, and therefore one lock is sufficient for the Yayin Mevushal. Tana Rabbanan, Yayin Mevushal ve'ilontis Shalavdei Kochavim Asurin. So the rabbis taught that Yayin Mevushal, cooked wine, the Ilontis, as well as Ilontis of Avodah Kochavim is Asurin. Okay, I assume that we're talking about Yayin Mevushal that was initially regular wine. Ilontis Kibir Yasa Muteris. However, Ilontis Kibir Yasa is permitted. Okay, but plain old, it's talking fascinating machlekes Rashi and Tosfos over here about plain old Ilontis would be mutar. So let's just go right there for a second. Vezui Ilontis, what is Ilontis? Because Tanya is learning the Brisa Gabi Shabbos when it comes to Shabbos. Aluntis, right? Inomlin and aluntis, right. Osin inomlin, osin aluntis. On Shabbos, you can make a inomlin because that's just like a drink, but you don't make aluntis because that's more sort of health oriented. Vezui inomlin, what is this inomlin that you can make? Vezui aluntis, and what is aluntis that you cannot? Inomlin, yainu dvasher pilplin, that sounds nice. Sounds like a nice Shabbos drink. Wine and honey and spice. I can't really imagine mixing like good wine with honey and spice, but there must be a context. Probably if you use just like mid-range wine, maybe that could actually be probably pretty nice, honestly. That sounds good. Wine, honey, and spice. You just have to know what you're doing probably. I can imagine that could be a delicious drink. Min yayin udvash pilpin. Aluntis, yayin yashon. Aluntis is old wine. Umayim tzlulim, and clear water, bafarsimon and balsam, davde mesusa, that they make and they provide people after they come out from I believe I think it was the bathhouse. They would provide you with this sort of health drink. So now, what's the machlekes Rashi and Tosfos? Very, very, very interesting. So very, very interesting. So what does Rashi say? Well, so let's take a look at Rashi. It's very interesting because it's Nogei L'Maaseh. It's very interesting stuff. So aluntis kibir yosef, if you look at Rashi, 2 lines into Rashi, shalei oyo yayin mitrila biad ovdei kochavim elo lekocha asuya miyad Yisrael. Very interesting. So we said that the aluntis is asura, and what's this aluntis? We said that aluntis is old wine, clear water, and balsam oil, I think. So we're saying that if the Ovid Kochavim makes this drink, so then it's going to be also because he's taking wine, which is going to be also because of, stam yenim yenesach. So he's taking wine and he's taking whatever the other ingredients were. I forget already. The clear water and the balsam oil. So he's taking these ingredients and he's mixing them together, but one of them is wine. So that's going to mess up the whole thing. But says Rashi, and listen why this is so interesting, that if a Yid had mixed this together and he takes wine and he takes water and he takes balsam oil and makes the concoction and then gives that to the Ovid Kochavim, it's mutter. Do you hear why this is so significant? It's so significant because basically if you have, I don't know, like a sangria or something, meaning if you have a mixture that includes wine. So if you have wine and you mix it together with other things, and then you bring that to a party, even though the wine is not mevushal, I'm not saying this la'alacha, but I'm saying based on Rashi's opinion, once you just have a mixture, if you take wine, that if you give the wine to Levi Kuchavin, it would be a problem because it would be, if he touches the wine. But if you mix it with other things, then that same wine becomes okay because it's a mixture, right? So as long as the Yid creates this aluntis before giving it to the Oved Kochavim, so then it's okay. So then it's okay, and it won't be an issue of Yayin Nesach. So now, Tosfos, however, disagrees because Tosfos says that actually he brings a raya from somewhere else that in aluntis, actually, what aluntis kibur yasa means is actually the way that they would make this aluntis is that there was a base that they would add wine to. So the base was the water and the balsam oil. And when it says aluntis kibiryasa, it means that if the um that if the Ovid Krechovim, right, had aluntis kibiryasa, right, the base aluntis, which is just water and balsam, that's okay. So kilu, if the so Tosis disagrees and he says no. If the Ovid Krechovim has aluntis that's already been prepared with the wine, that's going to be a problem because of yenesech stamyenim. Um, but if what the Ovid Krechovim has is aluntis kibiryasa, just the base of it, which is water and balsam oil, well then that's okay because there's no wine in it. But if there was a mixture, so then it would be a problem according to Tosfos. And he does say though that um, if you have though like a cooked dish that had wine in it, well then I think he says that that was okay. So for example, I think the point is if you go to like a restaurant or something, let's say you have a Jewish cook or whatever, and he puts wine in a dish, and the dish has lots of things in it, and then you cook it, and then afterwards already you have this mixture that's already been cooked, and it's like part of the dish, and you can't actually see it. I think Tosfos quotes the Ritzbah, which I think he says that would be okay. But anyways, very interesting machlokes Rashi and Tosfos over there. Now, okay. Now, Rabbi Rav Yosef Dami Tarvayu, Rabbi and Rav Yosef say, Yain Mozug Ein bo mishum gilui. Oh, so diluted wine, right? Of course, we've learned in the past about they would have this wine concentrate, but you wouldn't drink the concentrate. You would add water, you would dilute it until it becomes as you like it. We saw we've seen the opinion of Ravid, I think at least one. I think, I mean, certainly at least once, I think at least twice even, that Ravid would say any wine that, in order for wine to be worth its salt, in order for wine to be considered a good wine, it would have to require at least 3 parts wine to at least 3 parts water to 1 part wine, that it's so kilu potent of a wine that it requires 3 parts water in order to dilute it properly. That's good quality wine. But anyways, so they would dilute their water, so their wine. So when wine is in its undiluted state, now we're getting to the right. Because what do we say? What are we saying? So when wine is in its undiluted state, so the snakes love it. And the snakes are going to go after it. And you have to be concerned about gilui. If you leave it opened and exposed, the snakes might get in and inject their venom into the wine. And that could be to deadly effect. Now, but once it's already been diluted, the snakes are less interested, and therefore it's okay. So, Rabbi Rav Yosef Dami Tarvayu Yain Mozug, diluted wine, Ein Ba Mishum Gilui. There's no issues of exposure. Yain Mevushal, cooked wine, Ein Ba Mishum Nisuch. There's no concern about Yain Nesech, as we have been discussing. Iboilu Dasa Kasha, Yain Mevushal, Yeshbo Mishum Gilui o Ein Bo Mishum Gilui. What about Gilui vis-a-vis Yain Mevushal? Right? We said Yain Mevushal, there's no concern of Yain Nesech, but what about Gilui? What about leaving it exposed? Is there a concern of snakes getting into the cooked wine? Tashma Kaminir, Heyed Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi al Yain Mevushal she'ein bo Mishum Gilui. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi testified about Yain Mevushal that there is no concern of exposure for Yain Mevushal. Rabbi Yanai Bar Yishmol Cholesh. Rabbi Yanai Bar Yishmol got weak, was sick. Al-Gab Rabbi Yishmol ben Zerud, Rabbanan Rabbi Yishmol ben Zerud, and the rabbis came to visit Rabbi Yanai Bar Yishmol. The Shayule to, I think the point was to visit him. Yazve become boilu. They were sitting around. They were schmoozing. They were talking, of course, about they were talking and learning, of course. Yain Mevushal, yesh bo mishum gilui, or ein bo mishum gilui. And the shaila was, Yain Mevushal. Do you have to be concerned about exposed Yain Mevushal? Or is that not a concern? Amalu, Rabbi Shmuel ben Zered. Rabbi Shmuel ben Zered responds, Hochiam Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So says Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Mishum Gavarabba, the name of a great man. Umanu, who is this great man who we are quoting? Reb Chia. Reb Chia was a great man. We learned all about Reb Chia in Masechta Bava Metzia. He was a great, great man. Yayin Mevushal, Ein Bo Mishum Gilui. That Yayin Mevushal, there is no concern of exposure. Amulei, Nismaich, and they said to, I believe, Rabbi Shmuel ben Zerud, now, is this reliable? Can we rely upon this, that Yayin Mevushal can be exposed? Machve lehu Reb Yanei bar Yishmael, Reb Yanei bar Yishmael, who was sick, he signaled to them, Olai val tzavari, upon me and my neck. Like, yes, I give full-throated backing, full-necked backing in this case, to the opinion of Reb Chia that there is no concern of Yain Nes of Gilui when it comes to Yain Mevushal. Shmuel v'Avlet. Shmuel and Avlet, who Avlet was an Oved Kechavim. Avu Yazve, Shmuel and Avlet were sitting tzazamen together. Aisu l'kamayu chamro mivashla, and they brought before the pair cooked wine. Mashchiliyode, so it's very considerate. Avlet pulled back his hand. Kilu, Avlet didn't want to touch the wine because he knew it was with Shmuel, and if he, Avlet, would touch the wine, so then, there'd be concerns about the Yenesech. So therefore, he said, look, you didn't want to touch the wine, so as, not to create any problems for Shmuel, in consideration of Shmuel. But Omar le Shmuel ever said to Avlet, we're talking about Yayin Mevushal here, Hari Omar, they said, Yayin Mevushal ein bo mishum Yenesech, that when it comes to Yayin Mevushal, there are no concerns about Yenesech, so don't worry about it, touch it all you want. Amse du Bchia, the maidservant of Reb Chia, igluye lo auchamra mevashla. There was Yayin Mevushal that became exposed, and she wanted to know what she should do. Is it drinkable or not? So the time to Reb Chia, so she came before Reb Chia Amela, and Reb Chia said to her, Ari Amu, they said Yayin Mevushal ein bo mishum gilui. He says that they say that when it comes to Yayin Mevushal, cooked wine, there is no concern for gilui. Shamidir v'ada ba'ahava. V'ada ba'ahava's attendant, igle le chamer meziga. So he had diluted wine that was exposed. Amalei, Havi Amru, Yain Mazug, Ein Bo Mishum, Gilui. Now Ravada bar Ahava responded that the word on the street is that by diluted wine there is no concern of exposure. Amr Papa. Now says Rav Papa, in terms of the diluted wine, Le'amar Ella de Mazig Tuva, when we say that diluted wine, that for diluted wine there's no concern of exposure, that's if the diluted wine has been diluted, Kimosha Tzarich, has been diluted very well. Aval, however, Mazig V'lo Mazig, if it is diluted only a shtickle, well then Shasi, the snakes will enjoy it. They will drink it and potentially leave a gift of venom in it. So it has to be mixed very well, diluted very well, in order to remove the concern of gilui. But if it's only a little bit mixed, there is still a concern of exposure. Where am I? Aval mazig v'lo mazig shasi. Frag the Gemara, mazig v'lo mazig mi shasi. Mazig v'lo mazig mi shasi. But is that true? Is that true? Right? I mean, we've been saying up until now that if wine is diluted, there's no concern of gilui. It says Rav Papa, well, that's only if it's diluted very well. Is that true? Rav Papa, you're saying that if it's only diluted a little bit, so the snakes are going to want it? But I don't think that's true. Rabba by Rav Huna, have a causal by Arva. Rav Huna was on a boat. He went boating. That sounds like a beautiful afternoon. Took out a boat, a bottle of wine. That sounds nice. Bring a Gemara over there. Maybe a chavrusa, take a boat out, a nice afternoon, bring some wine, maybe, mix it with some honey and some spices like we saw earlier on, right? That very refreshing drink. What was it called? Aluntis, or maybe even Inomlin. Oh no, I think Inomlin was Inomlin was, but the Aluntis I think sounded okay as well too. Make one of these wine drinks. Take out a boat with some wine, a Gemara, of course, a friend. Life is good. He had wine with him. All was hunky dory until Rabbi Bar Huna noticed that there was a snake coming for that wine. The Shamis Rabbi Huna says to his attendant, Sami Eine Didain. No, get rid of the snake. So how did he get rid of the snake? Brilliant. Instead of like taking his, I guess like bow and arrow and shooting an arrow at the snake or something. So Shakil Kalimaya Shadabe Visarlachore. So what did the attendant do? He simply took a little bit of water, put it into the wine, and now that it was mixed, the wine was mixed with water, the snake was uninterested. So what do we see? So we see that even a little bit of water is enough is enough of a dilution that there's no longer a concern of gilui. So says the Gemara, it's a little bit more nuanced. Achaya moser nafshe, a meziga lo moser nafshe. Here's the difference. Okay, if you have wine that is not mixed at all, so for that the snake is for sure going to go after it. So much so that it'll even risk its life, right? Meaning here you have a boat. On the boat is Rabba Bar Huna, his attendant, who knows who else is there. There are people there. People that don't want the snake there. People that could potentially be mortally dangerous, existentially dangerous to this snake. So in order for the snake to risk its life, it would have to be really good stuff. Undiluted, full, cask strength stuff. So that would be an issue of gilui, right? And the snake is even going to risk its life for that. If the wine is very well diluted, well then there's no concern at all. Snake is not interested in watered down wine. Now, where it's more nuanced is when it's only a little bit diluted. So in that case, the snake is interested when nobody's looking. But when people are there and it's dangerous for the snake, it's going to stay away, which is what we saw with Rabbi Huna now and his attendant. That when the attendant added a little bit of water to the wine, all of a sudden it was not worth it for the snake to risk its life. However, as Rav Papa had pointed out, there is still a concern about exposure that if nobody's looking, the snake can go for it. So therefore, you do still need to be concerned about exposure when we're talking about a minimal dilution. Okay, so but is that really true? I'll argue that even for diluted wine, the snake will risk its life. Reb Yanai, Reb Yanai was in a place called Be'achbure. Bar Hedja, some say it was Taka Bar Hedja, it was in Be'achbure. Avu Yasve, and they're in Be'achbure, they were sitting around. Vavu Koshosu Chamra, they were drinking wine. Meziga, drinking diluted wine. Poshlu Chama Bekuva, when they were done drinking their diluted wine, there was a shtickle left in the barrel. Vitsaruni Bepunke. So they wrapped the opening of the barrel with some kind of a cloth. And what did they see? When they turned around, they found that there was a snake by the barrel. I guess they came back and they looked at the barrel and there was a snake. Tishakil Maya, the snake was like finding some nearby water, slurping it up. Virama Bekuva, and was spitting out the water into the barrel to get the wine level up so that it would rise to the top of the barrel and it would be able to drink. Adamola Bekuva, Visalik Chamra Ilave Parvonko, until the barrel was filled up, because there was a cloth at the top. So the snake couldn't get into the barrel. What it was doing was it was basically filling up the barrel with water until it would basically reach the top and seep through the cloth that was at the top. And then he would be able to drink. Vishasi would be able to drink. So we see that that here is, who was there? That was Rabbi Yana, maybe Rabbi Bar Hedge, and it sounds like they were sitting around with other people. There were people around, and yet the snake was risking its life for diluted wine. So, and for the Gemara, Amri de Mozig Ihu Shasi. Look, if the snake himself is doing the diluting, such as in this case, he'll drink that. But if other people diluted the wine, he's not interested. He needs to control. He knows how he likes it. They wouldn't drink that. What are you giving me explanations for dangers? Kilu, we're talking about life and death over here, right? There seems to be a concern that snake venom is going to get into the wine and people are going to drink it and die. And you're telling me that, well, it depends. Did the snake put it in? Did other people put it in? If other people put it in, the snake doesn't want it, you could drink it, no problem. Really? You're telling me you're playing with people's lives over here. There's significant, there's real consequences at stake. And therefore, like it sounds like Rav Ashi Vitem Rav Misharsha is saying you shouldn't be drinking exposed, diluted wine. Omer Rava says Rav Yochsad Halacha is Yayin Mozuk when it comes to diluted wine. Yesh bo mishum gilui, there is a concern of exposure. Yesh bo mishum yein nesech, and of course there's also a concern of yein nesech, right? So long as it wasn't cooked. Yayin Mevushal, however, when it comes to cooked wine, ein bo mishum gilui, there is no concern of gilui there. Ve'ein bo mishum yein nesech, there's also no concern of yein nesech. Shamad Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi, Iglaya u kista demaya v'avenoyim gabo. The attendant of Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi, there was a kista, which is like a certain measure of water that was exposed. And the attendant was shluffin, he was sleeping next to the exposed water. And he woke up, and also Legabe to Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi, and he came to Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi and he asked him, the water was exposed, I was sleeping, what happens? What next? Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi says, they said, Emas yoshein olein. Well, the snakes find a sleeping fellow to be intimidating. The intimidation of the sleeping fellow is upon the snakes, and therefore they wouldn't have drinking the water. This is only a schnatz. This is only if you're sleeping during the day that the snakes are intimidated. No, but at night they're unintimidated. Veloya, which is actually not the case. Loshna b'imam of loshna b'lelia, emas yoshen alein lo aminun. Actually, doesn't matter if it's during the day, doesn't matter if it's at night. We're not going to say that the snakes are scared of the humans. If there was exposed water, don't drink it. Rav l'shasi mibei aramoya. Rav would not drink water from Arameans. Omri said lo zahiri begiloi, because he says that they are not stringent when it comes to when it comes to ensuring that water is covered at all times and not left exposed. They're not concerned about that. Therefore, says Rav, he doesn't drink water from the Arameans because of Yayin Megullin. Mi be'ar malta shosi. But if he goes to a widow's house, or let's say water from a widow, he would drink, because even though she might not be familiar with the halachas of Yayin Megullin, however, Amar Sircha de Gavra Nikita, but she's sort of incorporated into her life the habits of her husband, of her late husband, and therefore, says Rav, I will assume that the water was not exposed. Shmuel, however, did the opposite. Lo shasi Miami Bear Malta. He would not drink water from a widow. Omar Leisla Aimsu de Gavra Velo Michasir. Shmuel says, look, her husband's not around to sort of enforce the water exposure practices, and therefore she's not going to be makpedes on it, and therefore she's not going to cover the water, and therefore there's a concern of Yayin Megullin. But Shmuel would drink the water from an Aramean house because Nihide Agiluya lo kaptek is granted, sure, maybe they're not particular when it specifically comes to Yayin Megullin per se, but Aman Kirusa Mia kaptek, but they are very particular about cleanliness, and therefore, even though they and therefore they keep their liquids closed at all times because they don't want anything falling into the water. So kilu, they're going to keep their water closed, even if it's not a concern for Yayin Megullin per se, but it's just a basic concern for cleanliness, right? They don't want they don't want to leave their water exposed because who knows what can fall into it. So therefore, for that reason, Shmuel was willing to drink water from the Arameans. Ikadam to those who say that Rav is the same, the difference is going to be for Shmuel. Rav lo shasi mayim be'aramoya. Rav would not drink water from the Arameans, Malta shasi, but he would drink water from the widows, as he said earlier, shasi. Shmuel lo shasi maya lo mi be'aramoya velo mi be'aramalta, whereas Shmuel wouldn't drink, according to this version, Shmuel wouldn't drink water in either of the cases, either from an Aramean nor from a widow. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Shalosh Yenis Hain, there are 3 types of wines, Ve'ein Bohem Mishum Giloi, that there's no concern with these wines of exposure. Ve'ein, these are the 3. Chad, Mai Masuk, sharp wine, bitter wine, sweet wine. Chad, Tila Charifa Dematz Rizika. One is the sharp wine is this Tila Charifa wine that is very pungent and can break barrels. Mar Yarnica, bitter wine is Yarnica. Mosik, sweet wine, is Julia. Rav Chama Masni Iluya. Rav Chama actually teaches that these were Gewaldige wines. There's no concern about the exposure, but it's not like they're bad, difficult, too intense wines. No, they're mamish delicious wines. Chad, Chamru Filplin. Sharp wine is wine with spices. Mar, the bitter wine, is absinthe. Mosik, and sweet wine is Meibarg. That's the sweet wine. Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, V'shlokish Karina. When it comes to Karina, Ein Bo Mishum Gilui, there's no concern for exposure. My Karina, what's Karina? Amra Babo. Chamra Chal Yoda Asimi Asya. Says Babo, it's sweet wine that comes from Asya. Amrava says, Komo Yeshbo Mishum Gilui. But in Asya, in its place, there would be concern of Gilui. My time in Chama Medina, how come? Because it's the wine of the place. Kilu, I guess where we live, this would be the wine would be considered way too sweet, and the snakes don't even want it. But where they live, that's wine. That's just kind of the normal wine, and the snakes would be thrilled to drink it. Amarava says, Rabbi, Chamra de Akrim, wine that is vinegering. Ad Tlasa Yome Yesh Bo Mishum Gilui. So for the first 3 days, okay. So for the first 3 days of its vinegration, there is still a concern for exposure. And also a concern for yenesach, okay, that it could be libated. But for Avodah Zarah, but after 3 days of vinegering, there's no longer a concern of exposure, and there's no longer a concern of libations, because once it's vinegar, nobody wants it. Not the snakes, not the Avodah Zarah. V'na'adoi Ahmed and Ardain say afilu baser tlasa yomi. Even after 3 days, chashin mishum giloi, we are still concerned about exposure, because my time is imnin mikre shasi, because sometimes the snake, if it's in the mood, he might drink it even after 3 days. Yayin toses ein bo mishum giloi b'cham tzisaso gimul yomim. Yayin Tos, I think, is like brand new wine. Yayin Chodesh Migito Ad Shehu Machmitz. There was Yayin Kornetosis. Yeah, so I just read Rashi. I think it's like brand new grape juice, essentially. I think you squeeze grapes, and then for the first 3 days, Ein Bo Mishum Gilui, there's no concern of exposure. So how long is this stage of Yain Tosis? Gimel Yom, 3 days, I guess, after it's been pressed. Oh, I got that right. Hashcholim, cress. I guess if you take cress and like grind it up and mix it with water or something. Ein ben mishum gilui. There's no concern of exposure. V'negola nagu ben iser. But in the exile, they would not leave that uncovered. V'lamar and ella delays behu chala. And when we say that there is they write that in the Golos, they would say that shchalim are aser. That's only if the shchalim is lacking vinegar. But if there's vinegar in it, migre behu, the snakes don't like it. Kutach abavli, this Babylonian dip that was like moldy and very strong, I guess. Ein bom shum gilui, there's no concern of exposure of nigola nagubo iser. But the people in the Golos, they would be makbid and saying and say that don't eat the exposed kutach abavli. Amr of Menashe isbeit nikuri chashinim. It says of Menashe that even according to the first view, that there's no concern of exposure by kutach abavli, but if there are tooth marks, if there are fang marks in it, well then don't eat it. Amr of Chia, Parashim Shmuel, may tif ein bo mishum gilui. Says Rav Chia Barashi, the name of Shmuel, that dripping wine. Okay, so if you have wine and it's like dripping into another container and it's going drip, drop, right? So there's no concern of yain of gilui there because the snakes are going to be, uh, the tif taf thing bothers the snakes and they're going to stay away from it. Ravashi would have tif lade tif tif. It has to be sort of a consistent drip that would then the snakes would stay away. Amar Rav Chia Barashi Amar Shmuel Pitena Mishum Gilui. I believe what it's saying is that when you separate a fig from a tree, so the top of the fig is like exposed. So there's no concern that a snake is going to inject its venom there at the top of the fig. Come on, who is this like? Like the following Tana, the Tani Rebbe Eliezer, or Mrs. Rebbe Eliezer. Oichel Adam Anovim V'Teinim Balayla. Person can eat grapes and figs at night. V'Nechoshish Mishum, right? He doesn't have to be concerned about anything, about venom or anything, maybe deadly bugs. Mishum Shenem Hashem B'Sayim Hashem, because it says that the Rabbani Shalom guards the foolhardy, and therefore, okay, so it sounds like there's no issue of gilui when it comes to these figs. I'm of Safra, Bishua Deroma, Safra and Bishua Deroma, Shlosha Mine Eresain. There are 3 types of snake venom. Shel Bacher Shokea. The venom of a young snake sinks to the bottom. Shel Benoni Mifaipeya. The venom of a medium-aged snake floats in the middle of the barrel. Vishel Zakin Tsof, and the venom of an old snake floats to the top. The name of the Kochish Chele. So does that mean that as a snake ages, it becomes weaker? But we learn in the Brisa that there are 3, that the older they get, the stronger, the more mighty they get. And these are the 3: dog, nachash, v'chazir. A fish, a snake, and a hog. So we see that snakes get stronger as they get older. They get stronger. Hudukамosiv, zehire, kolish. They get stronger as they get older, but their venom, however, gets weaker. Shal bacher shokei l'mayel. So when we say that the venom of a young snake, sinks to the bottom, what's the nafkamina? The Tanya Chovis Shenizgale, that if you have a barrel that was exposed, so Afapisha Shasu Mimena Tisha, even though 9 people have already drinking from the barrel, Velo Meser, and they didn't die, so shouldn't that be an indication that all good? There's no snake venom? Lo Yishtem Mimena Asiri, the 10th person should not drink from it, because it might be young venom that sunk to the bottom. That's why nobody else died, but the venom is waiting for you at the bottom. The 9 people drank from the barrel, and nobody died. And the 10th guy took a glass, and that was his last glass of wine. Amar Reb Yirmiyah Zeu Shokeh, and says Reb Yirmiyah, you see, the reason why the person died, the 10th guy died, is because there was young snake venom at the bottom of the barrel that sunk to the bottom of the barrel. And also a melon, shenizgalsa, that became revealed. Avatiach, of course, in modern now currently is a watermelon. Right, I'm about to head back to Eretz Yisrael, where, excuse me, where it's I imagine it's still watermelon season. I certainly hope it's still watermelon season. The watermelons in Eretz Yisrael, woo. As I said recently, I've been, Baruch Hashem, we have watermelons here in America too. The watermelons in Eretz Yisrael. Now that is something else. I encourage everybody to go to Eretz Yisrael, and when you're there in the summer, treat yourself to a watermelon, a good watermelon. Go to a place where they have good watermelons. Put it in the fridge, cut it up into nice sized pieces. Sheesh, that's something else. Anyways, so you could be talking about melons. I kind of prefer watermelons because I feel like watermelons actually, I feel like you can work with better in this context of like absorbing. So and similarly melons. I'm just gonna say melons, but I'm imagining a watermelon. The question is if they had watermelons there. Maybe they were just different kinds of melons. Maybe there were melons that we don't know about. Sheniz galso, that was revealed. Even though 9 people ate from the melon, and they did not die. Asiri, the 10th person, should not take his chances. There was Tisha, that 9 people ate from a melon, and they didn't die. But faithfully, the 10th guy ate from the melon and died. Rebbe says it's because there was venom in there that had sunk to the bottom. The Rabbi taught, Maim shenizgalu, revealed, exposed water. Don't spill them out into the public domain. It's dangerous, venomy water. You shouldn't use this water to keep down the dust in the house. Don't use this exposed water to make clay. Don't give this water, don't give exposed water to your animal or to your friend's animal. And don't use this water to wash your face, your hands, your legs, your feet. Others say sirta, also in sirta mutter, any place on your body where there are indentations for this water to collect, don't do it. But if there's no such indentations, it's fine. Acherim anu Tanakama, aren't the Acherim say the same as the Tanakama? Because they're saying don't put it in places with indentations. Your face is a place with, crevices and indentations and things. So aren't they saying the same thing? So you could be nayu gavayad v'gavredel v'rumni de'ape. Well, the nifkamina would be the top of the hand, the top of the foot, your cheekbones. Those are places that are on your face, but aren't necessarily crevicey. Amar Mavi said earlier, he said, don't feed this exposed water to your own animal, to your friend's animal. We learned in a brisa that you can feed the water to your own animal. That's talking about a cat. Cats can deal with venom. They eat snakes, they can deal with venom. That's the case, the Chabinami. So feed it to your friend's cat. What's the problem? Well, it's going to make your friend's cat weak. Well, it'll make your own cat weak too. Well, your cat will heal. Your friend's cat will also heal if there's venom in it. The difference is that, well, your friend might be interested in selling his cat, and now he'll be unable to sell his cat while the cat is sick because you've fed it venom water. So don't feed your friend's cat exposed water. You could feed your own cat exposed water if you like. That was Daf Lamed Masechta Avodah Zarah. I gotta head over to the airport now to fly back to Eretz Yisrael. Today we started discussing the topic of Yayin Mevushal, cooked wine. The topic of cooked wine, and how there's no Yayin Nesech when it comes to cooked wine, and that you don't have to worry about revealed, exposed wine. when it comes to cooked wine. We talked about mayim, we talked about exposed liquids. We said ultimately that diluted wine, you would have to be concerned about exposure, and you would have to be concerned about um, Yein. And I'd say that those were kind of the main sugyas of today's daf. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.